What's up, friends? Welcome back to the Pack a Day podcast. I'm your host, Andy Herman. You can follow me on Twitter at Andy Herman NFL. Appreciate you joining me today. Have, what I think is going to be a really, really fun episode that I'm really excited to go over. For those of you who are watching on YouTube, it may be a little bit more reading and looking at some of the statistics I put together, just because there's a ton to go over and a ton of data. But if you're listening on the audio, hopefully you won't be able to tell anything different. But either way, whether you're on YouTube or the audio version, appreciate you being here. Make sure to subscribe if you haven't already. Before we get to my main topic, which is going to be really kind of a deep dive into how Green Bay scored touchdowns a season ago and how the losses of potentially MVS and Davante Adams could sort of affect that production and those touchdowns in 2022, I did want to quickly go over some remarks from Kirk Benkert. He had the opportunity to speak on his Twitch channel, and he talked a little bit about Brian Gutekunst and him getting released. And I know in some of the comments in the video that I did about Benkert and getting released, there were some disparaging remarks towards Brian Gutekunst for making this move. I know there were some on Twitter as well, but I thought it was really important to read the comments that Kirk Benkert made, because I think it definitely does put it in a very different light. And he said, quote, "I want you guys to know the way that he did it and went about it, mad respect for him and for the window that he cut me in to give me an opportunity to actually go somewhere and compete for another job to make the 53, knowing that there was no chance for me to make the 53 here. Respect the bleep out of that." So if you think there was any hard feelings from Kirk Benkert and the decision here and how Brian Gutekunst went about the release and went about that entire process and operation, Kirk Benkert, the guy who actually was released and relieved of his duties as quarterback of one of the quarterbacks of the Green Bay Packers, had nothing but mad respect for Brian Gutekunst. So again, this is it. There have been times, clearly, through the Aaron Rodgers saga and other situations where maybe Green Bay, I think their bedside manner lacked a little bit, and how maybe they handled some of these situations from time to time. That certainly seems to not be the case anymore. And more often than not, the stories that come out afterwards are that Green Bay handled their business the way that they were supposed to. As I mentioned the other day, these are never easy decisions. And the fact that Brian Gutekunst, felt, and the coaching staff felt convicted that this was the right move to make, even though it was going to be unpopular with a fairly large subset of the fan base. I think it just goes to show that they have a belief in what they're looking for, and they're going to make the choices that they think are best for 1265, regardless of what fans think. And again, that's not easy, but even Kirk Benkert had nothing but respect for how the Packers and Brian Gutekunst handled this entire situation. So wanted to touch base on that quickly, but let's jump right into my main topic for today, which is a deep dive into the Packers' 55 total touchdowns from 2021. That includes the regular season and their one touchdown against the 49ers. That game is just so frustrating. I was looking at that again, and I'm not going to talk about it now. But anyway, 55 total touchdowns, 53 on offense, 2 on defense, none on special teams. Again, that is regular season and playoffs. The first thing I wanted to look at is, all right, for all of those 55 touchdowns, how many of those are actually coming back as of right now in 2022? Well, all 39 passing touchdowns are coming back. 37 from Rodgers, 2 from Jordan Love. So 39 out of 39 of the passing touchdowns are returning in 2022, at least as of this point. 14 of the 14 rushing touchdowns are returning in 2022. A.J. Dillon had 6. Aaron Jones had 4. Aaron Rodgers had 3, and then Patrick Taylor had 1. So 14 of the 14 rushing touchdowns as of right now are still on the roster. 25 of the 39 receiving touchdowns are still on the roster. Davante Adams with his 11 are gone. Allen Lazard had 8. Aaron Jones had 6. Randall Cobb had 5. MVS only with 3. He's clearly gone. Josiah DeGuara with 2. Robert Tonyan with 2. And A.J. Dillon with 2. So 25 of the 39 are gone. The only 14 that are missing are, again, from Adams with 11 and MVS with 3. And the 2 defensive touchdowns, both were Rasul Douglas, and he is back as well. So all of the passing touchdowns return, all of the rushing touchdowns return, all of the defense touchdowns return, all of the special teams touchdowns return, because there were none of them for, I don't even know how many decades now it feels like. But receiving's a big one, right? The majority of those, Lazard, Jones, Cobb, DeGuara, Tunyon, Dillon, all returning, 6 of the 8 players who had receiving touchdowns. But clearly a big gap from Davante Adams with 11, as well as MVS with 3, that they will have to sort of come back from in some capacity, or at least replace those touchdowns in some capacity. The biggest thing that I wanted to go over here, the biggest takeaway in this, was the grind that it took Green Bay a season ago, even with Davante Adams and MVS on the roster. I just want to run through this. This is maybe not the best podcast / videocast material here, but I want to run through this really quickly. These were the 55 touchdowns, or more importantly, the 53 offensive touchdown drives for the Packers a season ago. Listen to how many of these were long, excruciating drives at times, all right? 11 plays, 75 yards. 10 plays, 56 yards. 8 plays, 87 yards. 11 plays, 75 yards. 5 plays, 23 yards, so that one's nice. 7 for 80, 9 for 87, 10 for 86, 13 for 64, 4 for 23, 4 for 40, 7 for 75, 9 for 81, 12 for 80, 10 for 90, 7 for 75, 13 for 75, 9 for 72. You got a 3 for 27 in there. 14 for 75, then 5 plays, 14 yards, 12 plays, 91 yards, 10 for 53, 11 for 62, 10 for 80, 9 for 74, 7 for 75, 12 for 94. Then you get a 1 play, but it's still a 1 play 75-yard drive. Then a 3 for 6, 6 plays, 89 yards, 13 plays, 75 yards. Then the pick 6 for Douglas, the 33-yarder. 11 plays, 75 yards, then another pick 6 for Rasul. 4 plays, 75 yards, 9 plays, 75 yards, then 1 play, 23, 13 for 71, 8 for 84, 11 for 77, 13 for 80, 11 for 88, then you get a 5 for 53, 10 for 78, 9 for 49, 6 for 66, 6 for 64, 7 for 37, 11 for 70, 13 for 74, 7 for 75, 12 for 57, 4 for 75, 10 for 69. Those are long drives over and over and over and over. And to give you a little bit more, concrete numbers on that, because again, I know that just me reading a bunch of drives to you may not mean a ton. Again, 53 offensive touchdowns, right? 39 of the 53 were at least 7 play drives. 39 of 53. That's 73.5% of the Packers' touchdown drives on offense were 7+ plays. 31 of 53, which is 58.5%, were 9 plays or more. So again, excruciating long drives where you have to be relatively perfect to get all the way down the field and score these touchdowns. Only 7 of the 53 were 4 plays or less, only 13.2%. And then again, you had the 2 pick 6 defensive touchdowns, which aided in a little bit more explosivity. But overall, offensively, these were grinded out drives. Another way of looking at this, of how many were 70 yards or more. 35 of the 53 touchdown drives on offense were 70 yards or more. That's 66%. 2 out of every 3 touchdown drives a season ago were 70 yards or more. 14 of 53, over 25%, were 80 yards or more. And 40 of 53, 75%, or 3 of every 4 touchdown drives, was 60 yards or more. So these are, again, very long, very painful drives that you have to be perfect, not commit mistakes, not have penalties, not have interceptions or fumbles, etc. It takes it out of you. There's going to be, it's a grind. The best way to put it is it's a grind. And Green Bay's offense last year was really a grind at times. Meanwhile, only 9 of the 53 were drives that were less than 50 yards. So 17%, 9 out of 53 were less than 50 yards. That's crazy. Only 9 touchdown drives for the Packers a season ago. So what? 1 every 2 games. 1 touchdown drive every 2 games was less than 50 yards, where they got good field position and were able to capitalize and score a touchdown on it. That is crazy. That is absolutely crazy. So only 17%. Then I wanted to look at, again, as we start looking at the grind of these drives, what were the biggest plays on the scoring drive? So let's say like the touchdown may have been a 1 yard run by A.J. Dillon, right? But maybe there was like a 40+ yarder from Rodgers to MVS that set the entire thing up, right? Well, here were the biggest play breakdowns. So 46 out of 53 of the drives, 86.8%, had the biggest play was under 40 yards, meaning there was not a huge explosive 40+ yard play. There was a 40+ yard play on 7 out of 53, so 13.2%. There was a 50+ yard play on only 4 touchdown drives, so 7.5%. And a 60+ yard play on only 2 touchdown drives, only 3.8%. So 86.8% of the time, the biggest play on any of the touchdown drives was 39 yards or less, under 40 yards. So again, it just goes to show you that Green Bay was not getting these big explosive plays with any level of consistency. So the next thing I wanted to look at of those big plays, right? We just look at, there was on every drive, 53 drives, 53 touchdown drives, somebody made the biggest play on those drives, right? So here's how that broke down. 14 were Davante Adams, 8 were Allen Lazard, 6 for Robert Tonyan, 5 for Aaron Jones, 5 for MVS, 5 for A.J. Dillon, 3 for Josiah DeGuara, 2 for EQ, 1 for Randall Cobb, 1 from Aaron Rodgers, 1 for Tyler Davis, 1 for Juwan Winfrey, and 1 was a non-pass interference defensive penalty, like a rough, I think it was a unnecessary conduct or roughing the passer or something like that, right? So those were the biggest play, or the players, etc., who had the biggest plays on any of the given drives. So again, there had to be, in this case, 52, because one of them was a Seahawks defensive penalty. There were 52 plays that were the biggest on any given drive. Adams had by far the most of those with 14. Then again, Lazard with 8, Tonyan with 6, Aaron Jones with 5, MVS with 5, A.J. Dillon with 5. Everyone else was 3 or less. So of those 52, of the biggest plays on the touchdown scoring drive, 31 out of 52 are returning, but Adams had 14, he's gone. MVS had 5, he's gone, and EQ had 2, he's gone. So they're going to have to replace 21 out of 52 of their biggest plays on their touchdown drives from a season ago. All right, let's look at this from a different way, right? So let's look at this from a run-pass standpoint, again, as we're looking at these big plays. Of the 53 biggest plays on their touchdown drives, and I just want to be very, very clear here because I feel like I didn't explain this the best. But so if there's let's just say the first drive, right, may have been 10 plays, 80 yards. The biggest play on that drive might have been 16 yards, but that would have been the biggest play from that drive. On the next one, it may have been a 75-yard touchdown to MVS. The biggest play was clearly the 75-yarder. So if you look at each of those drives individually, who had the biggest play, that was what I just did. But if you look at it from a run-pass standpoint, and clearly here you're expecting more passes, right? You're going to expect that your biggest, most explosive plays were passing plays. But only 4 of the 53 biggest plays on their touchdown drives were runs. A.J. Dillon had a 25-yard run. Aaron Jones had a 28-yard run. A.J. Dillon had a 12-yard run. And Aaron Rodgers had an 18-yard scramble, meaning only 3 of the 53 were actually called runs. One of them was a scramble by Rodgers. So they failed to get much explosivity out of their running game in these touchdown drives. So that's something that they're definitely going to need to work on. Although the good news here is that Dillon, Jones, Rodgers all returning, and they were the ones that had those big explosive run plays. So now I wanted to take a look at those 40+ yard plays. So Green Bay had only 7 40+ yard plays in their 53 touchdown drives. Only 7. Davante Adams had 3 of those, a 50-yarder, a 41-yarder, and a 43-yarder. MVS had 2 of those, a 47-yarder and a 75-yarder. A.J. Dillon had 1, a 50-yarder, and Josiah DeGuara had 1, a 62-yarder, which means that for their 40+ yard plays, only 2 players that had those from a season ago are returning, Josiah DeGuara and A.J. Dillon, which, if we're being honest, I don't think are players you can count on to have consistent explosive plays. No offense to A.J. Dillon or Josiah DeGuara, I just don't think either are going to be huge 40+ yard play performers, meaning that Adams 3 and MVS's 2 are likely going to be sorely missed, and they're going to need somebody to pick up the pace in their stead. All right, let's take a little bit more look at the run-pass differential here. On their 53 offensive touchdown drives, 37 of the 53 had more pass plays. So 69.8% of their touchdown drives had more pass plays than run plays. Only 22.6% had more run plays than pass plays. So again, pass was king here. Only 4 of the 53 drives had even amounts of run pass. So for all of you like Green Bay's got to stay balanced, Green Bay's got to stay balanced, this would tell you no, on their 53 touchdown drives, they passed more on 37 of those. And they only ran more on 12, and they only had an even pass run split on 4 of the 53 drives. And you might be like, well, okay, but what about like if they had one more pass or one more run? All right, well, 15 of the 53 had drives that were at least within one run or pass within each other. So only 28.3% what I consider like very balanced, right? The majority, about 71.7%, had either favored the run or favored the pass and were not exactly staying balanced. So while I still think it's important to stay balanced within a game, on any given drive, the Packers had more success on their touchdown drives when they had more pass plays. 69.8% of their touchdown drives were favoring the pass. The next statistic is very unscientific, and I just sort of am making it up here, but I tried to track it as best as I can. There's no perfect way to track this either, but I wanted to go over, all right, on these 53 offensive drives that scored touchdowns, who was the key weapon on these drives? And in some, it wasn't perfect. On a lot of drives, they were just spreading the ball around, so I didn't credit anyone on those drives where there wasn't a clear, somebody that was in front and clearly had, more touches, more yards, etc. In other drives, it was a little bit tough because maybe there was a player who had like one catch for 40 yards, and then like A.J. Dillon had like 5 carries for 38 yards. Do you want to give it to the guy who had the 40-yarder? Do you want to give it to the guy who had 5 touches for 38? In that situation, I usually gave it to the guy with like 5 for 38. But very unscientific here. But 12 of the 53 drives, I charted A.J. Dillon as the key weapon more than anyone else, which goes to show they may need to, like, especially with Adams out, especially with MVS gone, like they may need to lean on A.J. Dillon more. 12 of the 53, I charted him as the key weapon, more than Aaron Jones, more than Davante Adams, more than MVS, more than Allen Lazard, more than Randall Cobb, more than anyone. A.J. Dillon was the key weapon. Now, this doesn't include Aaron Rodgers, who's obviously always the key weapon. He's the MVP of the league. But I'm talking wide receiver, tight end, running back here, right? So 12 of the 53, I charted A.J. Dillon as the key weapon. 10 of the 53 was Aaron Jones, and 10 of 53 was Davante Adams. So while it didn't necessarily, behoove Green Bay to be balanced, and while it actually showed that passing was better, involving Dillon and Jones, whether that be through the running game or through the passing game, proved to be very beneficial. 22 of the 53 drives, they were the key weapon on those drives. So it definitely was beneficial when they were featuring the running backs. Patrick Taylor had one as well, where he was the key person on the drive, on the touchdown drive. So 23 out of 53 were the running backs. 10 were Davante Adams, 3 were Allen Lazard, 2 were Josiah DeGuara, 1 was MVS, as I mentioned, 1 was Patrick Taylor, and then the rest were just basically spreading the ball around, or there just wasn't a key player. But I thought it was very interesting that on 22 of those drives, and really the two biggest key weapons on those touchdown drives were A.J. Dillon and Aaron Jones, and then Davante Adams right up there as well. So Davante Adams with 10 gone, MVS with 1 gone, so 11 of those are going to have to be replaced. But I thought one of the really telling things here is I would have expected MVS to be a lot higher based on how frequent they were to get him the ball. Just goes to show that, yes, on 10 of those 53 drives, which is basically, 1 out of 5, basically 20%, Davante Adams was the key player, but they still found ways to score on 43 other drives where Davante Adams wasn't the key guy on that drive. So it's not like they have to replace a ton here. They just have to figure out a way to continue to be, when I say balanced, I don't mean run pass. I mean just spreading the ball around and getting guys involved and able to make plays. And I think Matt LaFleur and Aaron Rodgers are going to be able to do that. All right, next I wanted to look at what I considered aided drives. So meaning the Packers offense was aided in some capacity by the defense or the special teams, right? So I charted 12 out of 55 where the Packers defense or special teams chipped in some capacity, including 2 pick sixes, which were direct touchdowns, 2 returns. Kylan Hill had like a 40-yard kick return, and then David Moore had like a 20-yard punt return with a 15-yard unnecessary roughness or something, some 15-yard penalty after the fact that helped set up the offense. So 2 special teams plays set up these offensive touchdown drives, 2 pick sixes, 5 fumble recoveries, and 3 interceptions. So they did get some, help on 12 of the 55 drives. A couple of those interceptions still, the offense still needed to go like 50 plus yards and things like that. But overall, I considered that 12 out of 55 of their overall touchdowns were aided by defense or special teams in some capacity. So something I definitely think can be improved upon a little bit, but it just goes to show that when Green Bay was able to get those, they were able to get a little bit better field position and were able to take advantage of those. All right, next wanted to take a look at the actual scoring play itself. On 31 of the 53 offensive touchdown drives, the actual scoring play was 9 yards or less, so 58.5% of the time. And 42 out of 53 times, 79.2% of the times, they were 19 yards or less, which means that for 79% of the time, Green Bay's final scoring play was within the red zone. They weren't scoring a ton outside of the red zone on the actual scoring play itself. And actually, only 3 out of 53 touchdowns, the actual touchdowns themselves, only 3 of the 53 were 30 yards or more on offense, which once again goes to show you that they just lack some explosivity and they need to find a way to generate more big plays, which is likely going to come from play action, which means they need to run the ball more, which means their offensive line needs to create more holes and generate bigger plays, as well as hold up on those play action plays so Aaron Rodgers and the receiver have enough time for that play to develop. It's all going to go hand in hand. But the other thing I wanted to mention here is that Green Bay had 5 basically big touchdowns this past season. The 2 pick sixes, which we mentioned already. So Rasul Douglas with a 33-yard pick six, Rasul Douglas with a 55-yard pick six, and then Aaron Rodgers to MVS for 75 yards, Aaron Rodgers to Davante Adams for 38 yards, and Jordan Love to Josiah DeGuara for 62 yards. You can make a strong argument that none of these connections will score touchdowns in 2022. We're not going to see Rodgers to MVS. That's impossible. We're not going to see Rodgers to Adams. That's impossible. We could theoretically see Love to DeGuara, but I think everyone's hoping that we don't have to see Love to DeGuara, that Aaron Rodgers stays healthy through the entirety of the season. So the most likely player who had a 30-plus yard touchdown a season ago that could repeat this year would be, in an actual, it was Rasul Douglas with the 2 pick sixes, and the odds that, he continues to get pick sixes of 30 plus yards or more, probably not the greatest, probability overall. So they're going to have to find new ways and new connections to get big touchdowns. So those were all of my key statistics that I wanted to go over. Now I'll talk to you a little bit more directly as to what were my key takeaways from this entire study. The first is that the Packers are returning all but 14 receiving touchdowns. So a couple things here. When I looked at the overall touchdowns, I was probably expecting a little bit worse. Again, all the passing touchdowns back, all the rushing touchdowns back, all the defensive touchdowns back, and 25 of the 39 receiving touchdowns were back. But I think it's fair to say that they are still going to have to very much account for the MVS and Davante Adams departure. That was 14 receiving touchdowns between the two. And maybe more importantly is just you would have expected in some capacity, especially Davante Adams, to take so much of the coverage and the attention that it would have made things easier for everyone else, right? So with no Davante Adams and with no key guy, yes, you could have Rodgers trying to spread the ball around a bit more, which I think will clearly happen. But the defense doesn't have to just, hone in on and focus on one guy. If anything, they're going to probably focus on stopping the run, probably put an extra guy in the box because they may not have unless Christian Watson or Romeo Doubs develops quickly, Green Bay is going to have to show that they can throw deep and have a deep threat. If you've got Sammy Watkins, Randall Cobb, Allen Lazard on the field, yes, Lazard had some big plays, but overall, you're saying, I'm going to take my chances with that. I think I can keep one safety really deep, cut off any real explosive plays, limit the big plays overall with just my corners matching up against your wide receivers. I'm going to stop your run, which in turn is going to stop your play action game. It's going to set up third and longs. I think as a defensive coordinator that's a recipe for success. So yes, I think that Green Bay has the capacity to, fill in those 14 touchdowns, but everyone else's touchdowns were probably easier because you had a Davante Adams on offense taking so much of the attention. So that's going to be something to keep an eye on. Clearly, as we went over in great detail, the Packers are going to need to find a way to create more explosive plays and set up the team with shorter fields. 73.5% of the drives were 7 plays or more. 66% of the touchdown drives were 70 yards or more. 86.8% of the scoring drives, the biggest plays were under 40 yards. And 3 times all season was there an offensive scoring play of 30 yards or more. They just need to be more explosive. They need to figure out a way to get those big plays down the field. And that probably starts with running the ball, getting the safeties up more, setting up play action, and hitting those deep balls down the field. Rodgers needs to be better at the deep ball. They're going to need something out of Watson and Dobbs. They're just going to have to figure things out because otherwise, the grind was real a season ago. I don't know if Green Bay can put up another 50 plus touchdowns having to grind that much with no Davante Adams, etc. So that is going to be something to keep an eye on. As mentioned, Green Bay is going to have to replace their playmakers. Adams and MVS had 5 of the 7 40-plus yards explosive plays on scoring drives. Adams and MVS had 2 of the 3 30-plus yard explosive touchdowns. And Adams, MVS, and EQ had 40% of the biggest plays on any scoring drive. So there are some real losses when it came to explosive plays by the Packers losing Adams, MVS, and to a lesser extent EQ. So once again, as we talked about, Christian Watson, Romeo Dobbs, and just this offense in general is going to have to figure out a way to replace those playmakers and still create big explosive plays. And then last but not least, Green Bay doesn't need to stay balanced. So I think overall, clearly Green Bay would love to stay balanced. And maybe this year it's more important with no Davante, no MVS, etc. But the statistics, at least last year, showed, hey, Green Bay can just throw the ball a lot, and that might be their actually their best path to scoring touchdowns, which when the MVP is your starting quarterback, that seems to maybe make a little bit of sense. That is going to do it for me today. Hope you enjoyed this deep dive and study into how the Packers scored touchdowns from a season ago. We'll be right back here tomorrow with an all-new episode. But until next time, and as always, go Pack Go.